I work nights at a hospital and the janitorial staff. It's a pretty easy job, but the place really gives me the creeps. I've been working here for a little over a month, and the reason it makes me feel uneasy is the frickin' ghost stories. I hear the nurses and doctors talk about them all the time. Random doors slamming in the hallways, shadow figures, and another set of footsteps following behind you on the stairwells. All these rumours really make me feel uneasy when I'm mopping up a dimly lit floor of the hospital. The money is good, and it's the only thing keeping me going. But something happened the other night that makes me want to quit. It all started a week ago as I prepared for my shift. Everyone in the West Wing was talking about a patient, a teenage girl recovering from a terrible accident. According to reports, there was an electrical fire in the poor girl's room, and she barely escaped alive. Unfortunately, the girl was left with severe burns all over her body, and was recovering in a room all wrapped up after an emergency treatment. My heart aches for the patient. I'm not hardened like these nurses or doctors, so hearing things like that really gets to me. The girl's the same age as my little sister, and I couldn't help but feel sad about what happened to her. I moved out of our parents' place a year ago, and in the process of living my own life, I haven't made much time to go back and visit. I shook the thoughts out of my head. I had to leave the personal stuff at the door and try and be professional. I winced when I was assigned to the West Wing that night. Well, I got my mop ready and was ready to go. The work was routine, with nothing out of the ordinary. I cleaned the restrooms, wiped down the counters and organised the nurse stations. I yawned, checking the time to see that it was nearly 2 AM. I had some extra time and knew I was breaking rules, but I was so curious that I got into the elevator and went to see the girl. I made my way up as I towed my janitorial cart and got to the girl's floor. The hallways were dimmed with only a few fluorescent lights on. Everything was so quiet, and my cart's squeaks echoed as I stepped forward. I looked towards the nurse's station to see a woman typing away at one of the computers. I slowly walked around. All the patients' doors were closed, except for one. I made my way over to see someone lying on a bed. All these wires connected to different machines were hooked to a thin frame covered head to toe in white bandages. I just stood there for a moment and just stared, hoping that this girl would recover. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The woman at the nurse's station called out to me. I turned and apologized, but the woman stopped me. "What a horrible thing, huh?" She spoke and I walked towards her, propping myself up on the counter. The girl was home alone when it happened. Her parents are out of town, but they'll be here in the morning. I let out a sigh. Jesus. The woman must have sensed how I felt and asked me if I was okay. But before I could answer, I got a call from my walkie-talkie. "Duty calls," I muttered and pushed my cart back towards the elevator. I went down to help sanitize some of the patient rooms, which didn't take very long. This floor was almost completely empty, so that made things much easier. As I was wrapping up one of the rooms, I stepped out towards my cart that was in the hallway. It was so damn quiet, until I heard the elevator doors open. I glanced over, and you can imagine my shock when I saw that thin, bandaged girl standing all alone in the elevator. We were only a few feet apart. I stood there looking in awe as she stared at me. I could hear her raspy breathing and the light above us began to flicker. "Hey, you shouldn't be walking around like this," I said, trying to sound authoritative. But something about this situation was making me feel uneasy. "It's just a hurt little girl," I eventually told myself. Here. Let's get you back up to your room, okay?" I told her. I simply stepped in the elevator. The door shut behind me and I pressed the button to her floor. We both stood motionless, the elevator groaning as it moved upward. A smell struck me, causing me to fight back the urge to vomit. The space around us was filled with the smell of burnt meat. I looked towards the girl. I hadn't noticed until then that she was facing me. She stood in an awkward stance. Her legs were bent and her head was askew. There weren't any bandages over her mouth and eyes, so I could see her damaged lips open as she continued her raspy breathing. I could see her eyes, the irises and pupils completely white. I opened my mouth to speak, but the taste of smoke assaulted me. I began to cough uncontrollably as my throat was filled with unseen fumes. Sweat began to pour out of me. The elevator felt so fucking hot. The girl began to move towards me. I could hear a sizzle with each of her steps. She opened her mouth and began to scream. "Help! Help me!" She grabbed my arms and I felt a burning sensation from her touch. I tried to shake myself from her grip, but she overpowered me. "Help me!" She screamed again. And behind her, I saw flames. The whole elevator was being consumed by a hellish inferno. Her bandages were touched by a cinder and began to catch on fire. She was burning in front of me, the white bandages quickly catching flame and disintegrating before my eyes. Underneath her wraps was melted flesh, and her mouth was open to let out an agonized wail. The flames went down her neck, down her arms, and ran up towards me. I watched helplessly as the fire started to eat me alive. I screamed with all my might, until ping, the noise caught me off guard. I looked around to see that the elevator was completely empty. The doors opened and I was on the girl's floor. In the hallway were some nurses and someone walking towards me with a gurney. The person was covered, but I knew who it was. The woman from early on was standing there and I walked over to her. She explained to me that the girl had just passed away. I was drenched in sweat and I touched both my arms. I could still feel the searing burn. The woman looked at me and grabbed my hand, asking me if I was okay. I didn't know how to respond. I just experienced something so intense, so unreal. I stared back at the elevator and the doors had already shut. I told the woman that I must have been tired or something, but she gripped my hand tighter. She assured me that these things happen sometime at this hospital. That it's just another ghost story for the place. There is no emergency at the morgue. The morgue is the only place in this hospital at which there is no emergency, a senior technician told me in my first shift. That advice is etched into my brain every shift, 20 years into the job. Tonight, just like every shift, I walk around the place, make sure nothing's out of place, then retreat to my cool room and lock the door. My phone rings. A doctor upstairs requests a transfer for an unfortunate patient who just coded half an hour ago. I ask him about the paperwork. He tells me to get my asses up here and do my job. I hang up the phone. The poor soul has already been dead, so obviously it's no emergency. My job is not the most important one in the hospital, but I do have principles and dignity. Mutual respect is the bare minimum if we're to work together, but I won't tolerate that. My phone rings again. A coroner requests to transfer a body, to keep it for some experts to examine further in the morning. She's nice, so I open the cold room for her to transfer the corpse. The case is a little sensitive, so I've heard, but I don't really care. Locker 3, row D. We sign the paperwork, and I slam the cold room shut. My phone rings for the third time. Some faint voice asks me if I'm not curious about what happened to the body in locker 3D. I say no, and hang up. Curiosity is not an emergency. Probably I'll find out about the body and lock a 3D on tomorrow's newspaper. Not tonight. Someone knocks on my door. I glance at the security camera. No one's there. There's no reason for me to get off my chair. Unseen entities are not emergencies. Something slams hard on the wall. I check the security feed. Locker 3D is wide open. Other lockers are ajar. The bodies are climbing out, growling, hissing. Some push themselves against the door, trying to escape the cold room. Good luck with that, I smirk. Fluids and body parts fling across the room. The morning team and the experts are going to have a fun day. Reanimated corpses, though, are not an emergency. I yawn and quickly fall asleep. My phone alarm rings. It's 7 AM. The experts arrive, all in hazmat suits, some with guns. They barge in, pin down the corpses with swift efficiency, and drag the bodies on autopsy tables. I love watching them work. I always tell my co-workers, in case of an apocalyptic event, I want to be with these guys and gals. Right now, it's not my job to be with them, however. The morning team arrives at 8 AM. I show them the monitor. They see that the experts are not done yet. We have some cups of coffee together. I quickly jot down last night's events in the logbook and conclude by only 2 words. No emergency.